Hello everyone. This is a While You Sleep video intended for people wanting to learn a little bit about Path of Exile 1 while they are trying to sleep. I am putting some gameplay in the background just to have an image. You don't need to focus on anything in particular. Just let the information slowly pass through. Of course, there are timestamps for people who fall asleep at one point, so you can come back. Let me know where you're from and if this video helped you go to sleep while learning this magnificent game. Chapter 1. Kind of game, what makes PoE different, long-term mindset. PoE 1 is an ARPG like Diablo, Last Epoch, PoE 2, Grim Dawn, just to name a few. What makes it different? It's more like this. Power comes from understanding systems, then combining those systems together, and slowly creating something stronger than the individual parts. You start to see this in many parts of the game, in the way skill gems interact with support gems, in the way you move through the passive tree, and even in how crafting works behind the scenes. Power comes from how things interact, not just what you find. The passive tree is about thinking, not picking. Other games, pick a skill, upgrade. PoE, a massive web of choices. You build a path, not just choose nodes. Key difference? It's not about what is best. It's about how you choose to specialize. It rewards planning and understanding, not just reacting. Skills are items, not abilities. In most games, your character has skills. In PoE, skills come from gems you socket into gear, meaning any character can use almost any skill. Builds are more flexible, but also more complex. Builds are engineered, not chosen. Other games, pick a class, follow a predefined style. PoE, you design a system. Skill, scaling, defense layers, item interactions. A build is more like a machine you assemble. Defense is layered and non-obvious. In many games, more armor equals more tanky. In PoE, survival comes from multiple overlapping systems. Here's just a few. Life, resistances, armor, evasion, block, spell suppression. And there are many more. Often, beginners die because they don't know what they're missing, not because they lack gear. It embraces complexity instead of hiding it. This is the defining trait. Other games try to simplify and guide you. PoE gives you freedom even if it overwhelms you. It assumes you will fail, you will learn, you will come back smarter. Knowledge is permanent progression. This is probably the most important difference. In many games, progress is tied to your character, to your gear, to your level. But in PoE, progress is something you carry with you. It becomes understanding. And once you understand something, you don't lose it, even when the league resets. Conclusion. So as you listen to the rest of this video, you don't need to try to understand everything. Just let the ideas settle slowly. Because in this game, understanding doesn't come all at once. It comes little by little over time. Chapter 2. Currency, value, and how the economy works. Now we're going to talk about one of the most important ideas in PoE, the concept of currency. and how value works in this game. At first glance, you might think Path of Exile works like most other games, where you collect money and then spend that money on items. And while there is gold in the game, gold is not what defines the economy. It doesn't play the central role you might expect. Instead, PoE is built around a different idea. Currency is not just something you spend. Currency is something you use. Almost every currency item in the game has a specific function, a purpose, a way to change or improve items. For example, some orbs upgrade an item's rarity. Some reroll its modifiers. Some add completely new properties. So instead of thinking of currency as gold, it helps to think of it more like a collection of tools. Each orb is a tool, and every time you use one, you are making a decision. This leads to one of the most important ideas in Path of Exile, the difference between function and value. The function of a currency item is what it does, what it changes, or what it creates. But the value of the same item comes from how useful it is to players and how rare it is. And these two things, function and value, are not always the same. Some currency items are very powerful, but not used very often. Others might have a simple function, but are extremely valuable, because many players need them. Over time, players begin to understand which currency items are commonly used and which ones are more rare or more desirable. And this is where the economy begins to form. In PoE, there is no fixed price for most items. Instead, players trade with each other, and prices are based on supply and demand. If many players need something, its value rises. If fewer players want it, its value falls. Over time, certain currency items become common reference points. Players begin to measure value using those items. So instead of thinking in terms of gold, players think in terms of these currencies, trading one set of items for another. And at first, all of this can feel confusing because the game does not explain it directly. But slowly, as you play, you begin to recognize patterns. You start to understand which items are commonly used, which ones are saved, and which ones are used more freely. And once that understanding becomes the form, the economy starts to feel natural. So for now, you don't need to memorize every currency item. You don't need to know exact values. You only need to remember one simple idea. In PoE, currency is not just money. It's a collection of tools. And value comes from how those tools are used and how much other players need them. And just like everything else in this game, this understanding will come slowly over time. Chapter 3. Your first decisions. At this point, you have a general idea of what Path of Exile is, but when you actually start the game, you are immediately asked to make decisions. And for a new player, these decisions can feel confusing. So in this chapter, we're not going to try to make perfect choices. We are simply going to understand what these decisions mean. League versus Standard. One of the first choices you will see is the option between playing in the current league or in Standard. The league is where most players are. It is a fresh economy, a fresh start, and usually includes new mechanics. Leagues have a duration of mostly about 3 months. Standard is where characters go after a league ends. It keeps everything, but it is less active. For most new players, choosing the current league is probably the best option. Not because it is easier, but because it is where the community is and where you will learn the most. The only major advantage of playing Standard would be you are not time-gated. The rest is pretty much cons. Here is a few. No access to the new stuff. Majority of people don't play in Standard. Economy is not fresh. All build guides, video guides, etc. are made for the actual league. Trade versus SSF. Another important concept is the difference between trading and playing solo self-found, often called SSF. In trade, players can exchange items with each other, using the economy we talked about earlier. In SSF, you do not trade at all. Everything you use, you must find or create yourself. For a new player, trade is usually a better experience. Not because SSF is bad, but because it removes a lot of limitations while you are still learning. SSF can be a very rewarding way to play, but it is often better explored later. Choosing a character. After that, you will choose a character. At first glance, it may seem like this choice defines everything. But in PoE, the class you choose matters less than you might expect. Every character shares the same passive tree and can use almost any skill. The main difference between classes is where they start on the tree, and a few specialized options later. So instead of worrying about the perfect choice, it is often better to simply pick something that feels interesting. Because what truly defines your character is the build you follow. Using a build guide, and this leads to one of the most important recommendations for new players. Using a build guide is not only acceptable, but it is highly recommended. Path of Exile has many interacting systems, and trying to understand everything at once can quickly become overwhelming. A good build guide gives you structure and removes uncertainty. It allows you to focus on learning the game instead of constantly questioning your decisions. Over time, you will understand more and rely on guides less. But at the beginning, they are a very helpful tool. Maxroll.gg has the best build guides in my opinion. The ones with league start tags are the ones that takes you by the hand, with multiple steps as you progress. Mobalytics is another great site for build guides, but in my opinion, less good in general with less details. Note that you will often learn about using POB, Path of Building. I think POB is a must when you get more comfortable in the game, not a necessity when you start. Maxroll or Mobalytics guides can be plenty enough. Campaign and progression. The same idea applies to the campaign. Following a walkthrough, or at least having guidance, can make your experience much smoother. Not because you need to rush, but because it helps you avoid frustration. The goal of your first playthrough is not to be efficient. It is to become familiar with how the game works. Maxroll has one, and following it, you will only do quests that matters and you will not get lost. Closing idea. So when you begin your journey, you don't need to make perfect decisions. You don't need to understand everything all at once. You only need to move forward one step at a time. Chapter 4. The Passive Tree Philosophy, Not Details. Now we're going to talk about one of the most well-known and often intimidating parts of Path of Exile, the passive skill tree. When you first see it, it can feel overwhelming. a large web of nodes stretching in every direction, and it is very normal to feel unsure about what to do. So instead of trying to understand everything, we are going to look at it in a different way. Not as a list of choices, but as a path. In many games, you are giving small groups of options, and you simply choose one. But in PoE, you are not just picking nodes. You're building a path through the tree. Each point you take connects to the next, slowly forming a direction. So instead of asking which node is best, it can be more helpful to ask, where am I going? Starting position matters. Each class begins at a different place on the tree, and that starting position naturally guides you towards certain types of nodes. Some areas focus more on strength and defense, others focus on magic or speed, but over time, you are free to travel wherever you choose. The tree is shared by all characters, so the starting point matters, but it does not limit you completely. Specializing over time. As you move through the tree, you begin to specialize. You are not trying to take everything. You are choosing what your character becomes better at. More damage, more survivability, or a specific type of scaling. And each decision slowly shapes your character. Not all at once, but step by step. Avoiding a common mistake. One of the most common mistakes is trying to take too many different things. A little bit of everything can feel safe, but it often leads to weaker results. In Path of Exile, focus is usually stronger than balance. Choosing a direction and following it tends to work better. About build guides. And this is where build guides become useful, because they already define a path through the tree. They remove uncertainty and allow you to focus on understanding what is happening, instead of worrying about every single choice. Over time, as you become more familiar, you may start to adjust things on your own. But in the beginning, having a path can make the experience much smoother. Closing idea. So when you look at the passive tree, you don't need to understand everything. You don't need to see the entire picture. You simply need to take the next step, and then the next. Because the tree is not something you solve all at once. It is something you grow into over time. Chapter 5. Skills and Gems. Now we're going to look at one of the core systems in Path of Exile, Skills and Gems. In many games, your character learns abilities, and those abilities are part of the character itself. But in PoE, skills do not come from your character. They come from items called skill gems. These gems are placed into your equipment, and when a gem is socketed, it grants you that skill. So instead of your character having abilities, your equipment is what gives you the ability to act. This means something very important. Almost any character can use almost any skill, as long as they have the right gem and the right equipment. This is one of the reasons Path of Exile offers so much flexibility, but it also means things can become more complex. Support gems. Now there is another type of gem called a support gem. Support gems do not give you a skill on their own. Instead, they modify other skills. They can make a skill deal more damage, change how it behaves, or add entirely new effects. But there is an important condition. For a support gem to work, it must be linked to the skill gem. Links, key concept. Equipment in Path of Exile has sockets, and sometimes those sockets are connected. Those connections are called links, and links determine which gems can interact. If two gems are placed in sockets that are linked, they can affect each other. If they're not linked, they do nothing together. So in a very simple way, power comes from links. The more support gems linked to a skill, the more powerful that skill becomes. This is why players often talk about 4-link, 5-link, or 6-link items. These numbers describe how many gems can work together at once. Mental model. It can help to think of it like this. Your skill gem is the core idea, the main action, and your support gems are the ways you modify that action, changing how it behaves and how effective it is. So instead of choosing a skill and leaving it as it is, you slowly shape it into something more powerful. Closing idea. And just like the other systems in this game, this may feel unfamiliar at first, but over time, you begin to see patterns. You begin to understand how certain supports work together and how to shape a skill into something that fits your build. And once that happens, the system starts to feel natural. Here is another important detail about support gems. Not every support gem works with every skill. A support gem has conditions, things it can support and things it cannot. So going back to a simple example, imagine two sockets that are linked. In the first socket, you place a skill gem, and in the second socket, you place a support gem. If that support gem does not apply to that skill, then nothing happens. Even though the sockets are linked, the interaction does not occur. And this can be confusing at first because visually everything looks correct, but the support is not doing anything. One way to know if your support gem supports your skill, you equip your skill, then put your cursor on the support gem in your inventory. It will show all equipped skills and if they support it or not, with a green check or a red X next to the skill name. Two skills linked together. There is another simple case that works in a similar way. If you place two skill gems in linked sockets, those skills do not interact with each other. Each skill still behaves independently, just as if the sockets were not linked at all. So once again, the links exist, but no interaction is happening. Because to have an interaction, you need a skill with a support skill. Multiple gems in bigger links. Now imagine something slightly more complex. A group of 4 sockets, all linked together. In this case, you could place 2 different skill gems and 2 support gems, as an example. And if those support gems can apply to both skills, then both skills are affected by the 2 support gems. So each skill receives the benefit of both. This is one way that links can scale and create more complex interactions. Socket colors. Let's keep it light. There is one more detail that you will notice. Each socket has a color, and each gem also has a color. For a gem to fit, it must match the color of the socket. There are 3 main colors: red, blue, and green. And very rarely, you may find a white socket which can accept any color. This is something you will naturally become familiar with as you play. Chapter 6: Defense Basics. Now we're going to talk about something that every player experiences at some point, suddenly dying without fully understanding why. Defense in Path of Exile works differently than in many other games. In some games, becoming more durable is simple. You add more armor or increase your health, and you can take more damage. But in PoE, survival is not based on a single stat. It comes from combining multiple layers that work together. Defense is layered. You can think of defense as a set of overlapping protections. Each layer reduces damage in a different way. And when these layers start working together, your character becomes much harder to defeat. But if one of these layers is missing, it can create weakness, and enemies may take advantage of it. Life and Energy Shield. The most basic layer is your life. Life determines how much damage you can take before dying. Some characters also use Energy Shield, which acts as an additional layer protecting your life. But having a large amount of life by itself is often not enough. A good general rule of thumb is to have 300 effective HP, called EHP, after each act. Effective meaning you add your life and energy shield together. So you add them up and you try to get 300 of those added together at the end of each act. So at the end of Act 1, you try to get 300 effective HP. So at the end of the campaign, Act 10, your goal is to have 3,000 EHP. Depending on the build you are playing, some are easy to achieve, others very hard to get that number. Resistances. Another very important layer is resistances. Resistances reduce elemental damage such as fire, cold, and lightning. Without enough resistances, even small hits can become very dangerous. This is one of the most common reasons new players die. Not because they lack life, but because too much damage is getting through. Armor, evasion, and avoidance. There are also other ways to reduce or avoid damage. Armor helps reduce physical damage. Evasion gives a chance to avoid being hit. Block can completely prevent an attack. And other mechanics like spell suppression reduce damage in different ways. Each of these acts as another layer, and each one helps in a different situation. There is, by the way, a very nice and dense article on Maxwell explaining defense. No single solution. And this leads to an important idea. There is no single defense that solves everything. Focusing on only one layer can leave you vulnerable, but combining several layers creates a much more stable result. Why deaths feel confusing. This is also why deaths can feel unexpected, because the game does not always tell you which layers was missing. You may feel like you had enough life, but your resistances were too low. Or you avoided most hits, but one hit still got through. And over time, you begin to understand what your character is missing. Closing idea. So when thinking about defense, it is not about finding one perfect solution. It's about building layers that work together. And just like the other systems in Path of Exile, this understanding develops slowly with time and experience. experience. And each time you improve your defenses, your character becomes a little more stable and a little more resilient. Chapter 7: Progression Loop. Now that we've explored the core systems, we can take a step back and look at the overall flow of PoE, not in terms of mechanics, but in terms of progression, what you do and how the game unfolds over time. The campaign. When you first begin, you enter the campaign. This is a long journey through different areas, enemies, and bosses. As you progress, you gain levels, find new items, and start building your character. The campaign introduces you to the systems we've talked about, your skills, your passive tree, your defenses, etc. And while it may feel like the main part of the game, it is often better understood as a kind of extended introduction. Transition to endgame. At some point, you reach the end of the campaign, and this is where the game begins to change. Instead of following a fixed path, you enter a more open systems. Maps and endgame. This is where the real game begins, and at its core, it revolves around maps. Maps are items that opens areas, similar to the zones you explored before, but now you choose which areas to enter and how you want to approach them. Each map becomes a small, repeatable experience. You enter, defeat enemies, collect items, and move on. The loop. And this creates a loop. You run maps to find better items and useful currency. You use that currency to improve your equipment. As your character becomes stronger, you can take on more difficult maps, which then reward you with even more valuable items. And over time, this loop continues. Map, improve, progress, map again. Expanding systems. As you move deeper into the endgame, more systems begin to appear. Different mechanics, different ways to encounter enemies, different sources of rewards. Some players focus on crafting, others on trading, others on specific mechanics. And just like everything else, these systems can be combined, creating different paths through the same game. Personal goals. And at this stage, progression becomes more personal. You might aim to defeat certain bosses, collect specific items, or simply improve your character step by step. There is no single objective that defines success. Instead, you choose your own direction. Closing idea. So when thinking about PoE as a whole, it is not a game you finish, but a game you return to again and again. Each time understanding a little more, progressing a little further. And as the loop continues, the system that once felt complex begin to feel familiar. Not because they change, but because you begin to understand them. Chapter 8. Mindset: How not to get overwhelmed. At this point, we've talked about many different systems: currency, the passive tree, skills, defense, and it is completely normal if it feels like a lot. Path of Exile is a complex game, and it does not expect you to understand everything at once. You are not supposed to know everything. One of the most important ideas is that you are not meant to master the game immediately. In fact, most players learn slowly over time. Even experienced players are still discovering new interactions and new ideas. So if something feels confusing or unclear, that is part of the experience. Focus on one thing at a time. Instead of trying to understand everything, it can help to focus on just one idea at a time. One system, one mechanic, or one small improvement. And as you do that, the rest of the game slowly becomes clearer. It's okay to follow guidance. It is also completely normal to follow build guides or walkthroughs. This is not a weakness. It is a way to learn. By following a guide, you reduce uncertainty and create space to understand what is happening. Over time, you may begin to make your own decisions, but there's no need to rush. Progress happens across leagues. PoE is designed to be played in cycles. Each league offers a fresh start and a new opportunity. And with each new beginning, your knowledge carries forward. Even if your character starts again, your understanding does not. And that understanding becomes your true progression. Mistakes are part of learning. You will make decisions that are not optimal. You may choose the wrong nodes, the wrong skills, the wrong items, and that is perfectly normal because each mistake is also a form of learning, and over time, those experiences begin to guide you. Closing idea. So as you continue your journey in Path of Exile, you don't need to rush. You don't need to understand everything. You only need to take one step at a time and allow the systems and the ideas to slowly become familiar. Path of Exile is not a game you solve. It's a game you gradually understand. And that understanding grows a little more each time you return. Chapter 9. Additional Concepts Introduction. Before we finish, there are a few additional ideas that you may encounter as you continue playing. These are not things you need to fully understand right away, but becoming familiar with them can help make the experience smoother. So I'll go through them slowly without needing to remember everything. What will be included in this section? Affixes, flasks, what to pick up, loot filters, labyrinth ascendancy, movement skills, inventory management basics, resistances reminder, gear upgrades mindset. Affixes. Another idea you may come across is the concept of item modifiers, often called affixes. These are the properties that appear on items such as increased life, added damage, or resistances. And these modifiers are divided into two groups: prefixes and suffixes. Most items can only have a limited number of each. So instead of having unlimited properties, items are constrained, but how many prefixes and suffixes they can hold. This creates an important idea. When an item is full, it cannot gain new modifiers unless something is removed or changed. And this is one of the reasons item crafting becomes more complex later on. But for now, you don't need to remember exact limits or specific combinations. Only that items are built from a small number of modifiers divided into two groups, and that these limits are what shape how items can improve over time. The majority of currencies are for modifying in a way or another the affixes on items. Flasks. Flasks are very important part of your character, and when you first begin, they are often overlooked. In many games, potions are used occasionally, only when needed. But in PoE, flasks are used much more frequently and often become part of your regular gameplay. They can restore life or mana, but they can also provide defensive bonuses, increase damage, or movement speed. And because flasks recharge when you defeat enemies, they are not just emergency tools, but something you use throughout combat. Over time, learning to use your flasks becomes a natural part of staying alive and becoming stronger. What to pick up? Loot filters. Another question that often comes up, especially for new players, is what to pick up. In PoE, a very large number of items can drop, and at first, it can be difficult to know what is worth keeping. It is very natural to want to pick up everything, but over time, you begin to realize that not all items are equally useful, and that being selective becomes an important part of playing the game. Early mindset. At the beginning, it is completely fine to pick up more items as you learn what they do. You may want to pick up equipment upgrades, items with useful stats, and currency items. This helps you become familiar with how the items are structured and what they can offer. Learning to ignore items. But as you progress, you will begin to pick up fewer things. Not because items stop dropping, but because your understanding improves. You start to recognize what is useful and what is less important, and over time, you naturally become more selective. Loot filters. To help with this, the game allows you to use something called a loot filter. A loot filter changes how items appear on the ground. It can highlight important items, hide less useful ones, and make everything easier to read. Instead of seeing everything equally, you begin to see what matters most. This reduces clutter and helps you focus on meaningful drops. For many players, using a loot filter becomes essential. Keep it simple. At first, you don't need to customize everything. Using a simple, commonly used filter is more than enough. And as your understanding grows, you may choose to adjust it. But there is no need to worry about that in the beginning. Closing idea. So when it comes to pick up items, you don't need to be perfect. You don't need to know the value of everything. You simply need to become familiar with what feels useful. And over time, your decisions will become more natural as your understanding slowly continues to grow. Labyrinth ascendancy. Another concept that you will encounter during the campaign is something called the labyrinth. The labyrinth is a special area that is different from the zones you usually explore. It is not only about defeating enemies, but also about navigating traps and different paths. As you move through it, you will encounter puzzles and mechanics that are not found anywhere else. Purpose. The main purpose of completing the lab is to unlock something called an ascendancy. An ascendancy is a specialization of your character. It adds a smaller, more focused set of passive nods that provide powerful benefits. These choices help define your build in a more specific way. You will not complete the labyrinth just once. There are several versions that appear throughout your progression, and each time you complete one, you gain additional ascendancy points, which allows you to continue developing your specialization. First experience. When you first encounter the lab, it may feel unfamiliar or even a little challenging. That is completely normal because it introduces mechanics that are different from regular combat. There is no need to rush it. You can always return when your character feels ready. Keep it simple. At the beginning, you don't need to understand every detail. You only need to remember that the lab unlocks your ascendancy, and that this specialization is an important step in shaping your character. So when you reach the lab, you can approach it calmly and at your own pace, because just like everything else, it becomes more familiar with time. Movement skills. Another thing you will notice as you continue playing is the use of movement skills. Movement skills are abilities that allow your character to move more quickly or in a different way. Instead of only walking from one place to another, you can dash, you can jump, or quickly reposition. These skills are usually granted by gems, just like your main abilities. And almost every build uses at least one movement skill. Why they matter? Movement skills are not only about speed, they also help you avoid danger, reposition during combat, and navigate areas more comfortably. In some situations, moving quickly can be just as important as dealing damage. At the beginning, you don't need to choose the perfect movement skill. Any simple option that feels comfortable to use is enough. Over time, you may find one that better fits your build or your playstyle. So if the game feels slow at first or movement feels limited, note that this changes as you gain access to movement skills. And just like everything else, they will become a natural part of your gameplay. Examples: Flame Dash, Frost Blink, Leap Slam. Inventory basics. Another small but important part of the game is inventory management. As you play, you will quickly notice that your inventory space is limited, and items can take different amounts of space. Some items are small, while others occupy larger areas. And this means you cannot carry everything with you. So early on, you begin to make decisions: what to keep, what to leave behind, what to sell. And just like with item drops, this becomes easier over time, as you start to recognize what is useful and what is less important. Selling items. Items you do not need can often be sold to vendors. In return, you receive currency items, and this becomes a simple way to turn unused equipment into something useful. At the beginning, it is best to keep things simple. Pick up items that seem useful or that you want to understand better, and don't worry about being perfectly efficient. Over time, you will naturally become faster and more selective. Using your stash. In towns, you also have access to a stash. This is where you can store items for later use, instead of carrying everything with you all the time. It allows you to keep important items without filling your inventory. As you continue playing, small habits begin to form. Checking items quickly, organizing your space, and making simple decisions. And over time, inventory management becomes something you do naturally. So when your inventory fills up, you don't need to feel rushed. You don't need to keep everything. You only need to decide what matters to you in that moment. And just like everything else, this process becomes easier with experience. PoE 1 is free to try, pay to play, meaning you can do the entire campaign free with the limitation of having 4 small tabs to keep your stuff, which is manageable during your first playthrough. When you get to maps after the campaign, this is where you get in the pay-to-play part, because you will need to buy some stash tabs that will give you the opportunity to now grow your inventory space by a lot. Some stash are dedicated to something specific, like the map stash tabs, where you can put tons of maps. There are also general stash tabs that are 4 times bigger than the default ones, called quad stash tabs, where you can put anything you want in it. In general, the first stash tabs to buy are almost mandatory are the currency stash tabs, maps stash tab, and at least 1 quad, which is, in my opinion, the bare minimum if you want to progress in maps after finishing the campaign. If you invest more time in the game, you will then realize that you will want other stash tabs also. Resistances reminder. Before moving forward, it is helpful to briefly return to an important idea: resistances. Resistances play a very large role in how much damage your character takes, especially from elemental sources such as fire, cold, and lightning. And while we mentioned them earlier, it is worth remembering just how important they are. Many difficulties in the game, especially for new players, come from low resistances. Even if your character has good damage and a reasonable amount of life, missing resistances can make enemies feel much stronger. And this can lead to unexpected deaths. So as you progress, it can be helpful to keep an eye on your resistances, not in a precise or technical way, but simply as a general habit, looking for items that help reduce incoming damage and improve survivability. You don't need perfect values or exact numbers, only a general awareness that resistances are an important part of your defenses. And as with everything else, this is something that becomes easier to recognize over time, as you begin to notice how your character responds to different types of damage, and how small improvements can make a noticeable difference. A good rule of thumb is to look for equipment that has a relative good amount of health and as much resistance as you can get. It should be your main focus on gear, except on your weapons. If you look at your stats, your goal is to be what we call resist cap, meaning 75% resistances in cold, fire, and lightning as fast as possible, and even more because at the end of Act 5, when you kill Kitava, the final boss in Act 5, you will have a penalty of 30% less resistances, including chaos, but you don't need to focus on chaos resist during the campaign. So in reality, before killing Kitava in Act 5, you want 105 in all 3 resistances, so you will be resist cap after, meaning 75% on all 3 resistances. Also note that you will have the same penalty at the end of Act 10 after you will beat Kitava again. Gear upgrade mindset. Another important idea when playing Path of Exile is how to think about gear upgrades. As you progress through the game, you will find many different items with different properties, and it can sometimes be unclear whether an item is actually better than what you are currently using. One of the key things to understand is that most items are not simply better or worse. Instead, they are combinations of different modifiers. One item might have more damage, while another has more life or better resistances. So upgrading your gear is often balancing what your character needs. Upgrades do not need to be perfect. Even small improvements can make a noticeable difference. A little more life, slightly better resistances, or a bit more damage. These gradual changes add up over time. Instead of looking for the best possible item, it can help to ask what your character is missing. Do you need more survivability, more damage, better resistances? And then choose items that move you in that direction. During the campaign, it is normal to replace your equipment quite frequently. Items are not meant to be permanent, especially early on. You are simply moving from one improvement to the next. So when looking at new items, you don't need to search for perfection. You only need to look for small steps forward, because over time, those small upgrades become meaningful progress. And just like everything else, your understanding of items will grow gradually. It is very normal to wear items that are not perfect, as long as they help your character move forward. Hope you enjoyed.